Kael'tar Station was never silent. The sprawling city in space thrummed with the pulse of alien life. Hovercrafts hummed through corridors, merchants hawked wares in melodic tongues, and the rhythmic chime of automated announcements echoed endlessly. But in one corner of the station, amid the neon chaos, the laughter of a boy rang clear, untainted by the city's gloom. 6-year-old Ethan Trent raced through the crowd, clutching a toy fighter craft. His mother, Amelia, followed close behind, her weary eyes softening as she watched him dart between aliens and humans alike, oblivious to the stares. "Slow down, Ethan," she called, her voice firm but warm. He turned, grinning, his dark curls bouncing with every step. "Catch me first, Mom!" Amelia sighed, quickening her pace. Ethan had his grandfather's unyielding spirit, a trait that had brought her father both fame and heartbreak. High above, a figure watched through the scope of a sniper rifle. Lorik Ven, the Zoran assassin, adjusted his aim. His translucent, chitinous skin shimmered faintly under the station's artificial light. He spoke into a communicator, his voice a low hiss. "The target is in sight." "Proceed," came the cold reply. Lorik's finger tightened on the trigger. Elias Trent sat alone in a dimly lit room on the other side of the station, nursing a glass of amber liquid. Retirement had not suited him. The man who had once commanded fleets now found his days consumed by silence and memories he'd rather forget. His military uniform, pressed and pristine, hung in the corner, a relic of a life he'd vowed to leave behind. A chime broke through the quiet. Elias frowned and activated his communicator. The message was brief: emergency, docking bay 14. The blood drained from his face. That was Amelia's sector. The shot was silent. A clean, precise beam of energy that pierced Ethan's small chest. His toy clattered to the floor as he crumpled, the light in his eyes fading before Amelia could even scream. "No!" She dropped to her knees, cradling his lifeless body. Around her, the crowd erupted into chaos, shouts, screams, and the hurried retreat of those desperate to escape the aftermath. Amelia's trembling hands pressed against the wound, as though sheer willpower could reverse the unthinkable. "Ethan, wake up, baby, please!" Her voice cracked, raw with disbelief. A shadow loomed over her. Amelia looked up to see a Zoran bystander, his luminous eyes wide with unease. "They're still here," he muttered. "Run!" Amelia's instincts kicked in. Clutching Ethan's body, she staggered to her feet and began to move, her mind a whirlwind of grief and terror. Elias arrived at docking bay 14 to a scene of utter devastation. The once bustling promenade was now eerily quiet, save for the distant wail of alarms. Security drones hovered overhead, scanning the area. His gaze landed on Amelia, slumped against a pillar, her face streaked with tears. She held Ethan's lifeless body tightly, rocking back and forth as though to comfort him. "Amelia!" His voice broke. She looked up, her expression a mixture of relief and anguish. "Dad, they killed him! They killed my baby!" Elias knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he touched Ethan's small face. For a moment, the hardened soldier in him vanished, replaced by a grandfather shattered by loss. "I'll find who did this," he whispered, his voice a quiet storm. "I'll make them pay." The station's security forces arrived minutes later, their insectoid leader clicking in agitation. "We are investigating," he said, antennae twitching. "But this appears to be an isolated incident." Elias's gaze sharpened. "An isolated incident? This was a targeted assassination, and you know it." The officer hesitated. "We have no evidence to suggest." "You won't find any," Elias interrupted. "Whoever did this planned it down to the last detail. But mark my words, I'll find them myself." Amelia grabbed his arm, her voice urgent. "Dad, don't. Please. You're retired. Let the authorities handle it." Elias turned to her, his expression resolute. "I can't stand by and do nothing, Amelia." "Not this time." She didn't argue further. She knew it was useless. Back in his quarters, Elias opened a secured compartment hidden behind the wall. Inside were weapons and tools he hadn't touched in years. He donned lightweight armor, calibrated his plasma pistol, and accessed the military-grade communicator he'd sworn never to use again. "Identify," came a familiar voice on the other end. "General Elias Trent," he said, his tone cold and precise. "I need intel on an assassination at Kailtar Station. Civilian target. Human child." A pause. "Understood. Data incoming." As the information began to flood in, a notification blinked on his screen. A name stood out: Shadow Syndicate. The Shadow Syndicate was a name he hadn't heard in decades. A clandestine group of assassins operating beyond the reach of any known government, they thrived on destabilizing alliances. If they were involved, this was no ordinary killing. Elias traced the sniper's trajectory to a high-rise apartment overlooking the promenade. The room was empty, but the faint smell of ozone confirmed a recent energy weapon discharge. He scanned the area, his keen eye catching a discarded communicator. Activating it, he heard the tail end of a conversation. "Prepare for Phase 2. The human resistance will crumble." His jaw tightened. This wasn't just about Ethan. It was about humanity itself. When Elias returned to Amelia, his resolve had hardened into steel. "I know who did this," he said. Her eyes widened. "Who?" "The Shadow Syndicate. They want to send a message, to make us afraid, to make us weak. But they've underestimated us. They've underestimated me." Amelia's expression shifted, a flicker of hope breaking through her grief. "What are you going to do?" Elias's voice was steady, but his eyes burned with fury. "Whatever it takes." Kailtar Station's underbelly was a place of perpetual twilight, where shadows clung to every surface and secrets whispered through every corridor. Elias Trent moved through the maze of rusted walkways and humming industrial pipes with the deliberate grace of a predator. Every sound, every scuffle of boots or hiss of steam, kept his senses sharp. He had spent decades navigating hostile territory, but this was different. This wasn't war, it was personal. The information extracted from Malvek had given him a name, but a name wasn't enough. Lorik Venn was a ghost in the criminal underworld, known only by the bloody trail he left behind. To find him, Elias needed to confront someone who dealt in the whispers of the station's darkest alleys, a broker of information who could connect the dots no one else could. The meeting took place in a derelict storage facility, its walls lined with forgotten cargo crates covered in layers of grime. The broker, a pale-skinned Tveran named Sinar, lounged on a makeshift throne crafted from scrap metal. His elongated fingers tapped rhythmically on the armrests, and his golden eyes gleamed with amusement as Elias approached. "Well, well," Sinar purred, his voice silky and mocking. "The famous General Trent, slumming it in the gutters. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" Elias remained unfazed by the Tveranese theatrics. "I need information. Lorik Venn." Sinar's smile widened, revealing sharp teeth. "A dangerous inquiry even for someone with your reputation. What's the bounty on his head these days?" "This isn't about a bounty," Elias said, his tone cold. "He murdered my grandson. I'm not here to negotiate. You'll tell me what you know, or we'll find out how much pain that smile can endure." Sinar's grin faltered for a moment, then returned, tempered with caution. "Ah, vengeance. A noble cause, or so they say. But information doesn't come cheap, General. Even for someone as persuasive as you." Elias pulled a small device from his pocket and activated it. A holographic projection of encrypted data from Lorik's files illuminated the dim room. "You'll give me what I want, or I'll share this with every intelligence agency in the system. Let's see how long your little empire survives with the syndicate breathing down your neck." The Tveranese amusement vanished. He leaned forward, his voice low. "You play a dangerous game, human." "I'm not playing," Elias replied. For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. Then Sinar sighed and gestured for one of his underlings to bring a data pad. "Lorik Venn is no ordinary assassin. He operates through layers of intermediaries, making him nearly impossible to track. But," he tapped the pad, and a map of Kael'tar's lower levels appeared. There's a warehouse in Sector 9, one of his known staging grounds. If he's still on the station, he'll be there. But don't expect a warm welcome. Elias memorized the map and turned to leave. General, Sinar called after him. One piece of advice, don't underestimate him. Lorik is not just an assassin, he's a weapon, honed to perfection. Men like you don't walk away from encounters with him. Elias didn't look back. We'll see. The warehouse in Sector 9 was a hulking structure of steel and shadows, its entrances guarded by automated turrets and patrolling drones. Elias observed from a distance, mapping out the defenses with the meticulous precision of a man who had spent his life dismantling enemy strongholds. He moved under the cover of darkness, disabling the nearest turret with a carefully placed EMP charge. The drone patrols were trickier, their searchlights sweeping unpredictably through the narrow alleyways. But Elias knew how to move unseen, slipping past them like a phantom. Inside, the air was thick with the hum of machinery and the faint scent of oil. Crates were stacked high, marked with symbols from dozens of different alien factions, evidence of the Syndicate's far-reaching influence. Elias found a terminal and connected his hacking device. Lines of code scrolled across the screen as he searched for any clue to Lorik's whereabouts. The files he uncovered painted a grim picture: records of completed hits, financial transactions, and encrypted communications between Syndicate operatives. One file caught his eye, an itinerary marked with today's date. Lorik was scheduled to meet a contact at a nearby docking bay within the hour. Elias copied the file and prepared to leave, but the sound of approaching footsteps froze him in place. A group of armed mercenaries entered the warehouse, their weapons at the ready. They moved with the confidence of men who didn't expect resistance. Elias slipped into the shadows, watching as they fanned out, their leader barking orders in a guttural alien tongue. One of them approached the terminal Elias had just accessed, frowning at the device still connected to it. "Someone's here," the mercenary growled. Elias acted swiftly, stepping from the shadows and taking the man down with a single, silent strike. Before the others could react, he fired a burst from his plasma pistol, the bolts finding their marks with deadly precision. The firefight was brief but brutal. When the last mercenary fell, Elias scanned the room for any signs of reinforcements. Satisfied that he was alone, he retrieved his device and slipped out the way he came. The docking bay was a sprawling expanse of platforms and cargo loaders, illuminated by harsh overhead lights. Elias positioned himself on an upper catwalk, overlooking the designated meeting point. He didn't have to wait long. Lorik Ven arrived exactly on time, his movements precise and deliberate. The Zoran assassin was as Malvek had described, tall and lean, his pale exoskeleton shimmering faintly under the lights. He carried himself with an air of effortless menace, his every step radiating confidence. Elias watched as a second figure approached, a hulking alien with cybernetic implants. The two exchanged brief words, their conversation inaudible from Elias's vantage point. His finger hovered over the trigger of his rifle, but he hesitated. Killing Lorik now would be too easy. He needed answers, and the only way to get them was to confront the assassin directly. Elias descended from the catwalk, his footsteps echoing through the bay. Lorik turned, his expression unreadable. "General Trent," he said, his voice smooth and devoid of surprise. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Elias kept his weapon trained on the assassin. "You murdered my grandson." Lorik tilted his head, his gaze cold. "Ah, yes. The boy. He wasn't the target, but collateral damage is an unfortunate reality of our profession." Rage flared in Elias's chest, but he kept it in check. "Who hired you? What's their endgame?" Lorik chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "You think you can unravel the Syndicate's plans with a few questions? You're out of your depth, General." Elias fired a warning shot, the bolt grazing Lorik's arm. The assassin didn't flinch, his confidence unwavering. "You're a fool if you think you can stop what's coming," Lorik said. "But by all means try." Before Elias could react, Lorik activated a device on his wrist, and a blinding flash filled the bay. When the light faded, the assassin was gone, leaving Elias alone with nothing but questions and a burning resolve to see this through to the end. The faint hum of Kael'thar Station's power cores vibrated through its metallic walls as Elias Trent sat in a dimly lit hideout, his mind racing. The confrontation with Lorik Ven had left him with more questions than answers. His grandson's death wasn't just an isolated act of violence. It was the first move in a larger game, one that threatened not just his family but humanity itself. On the table before him, the data drive he had stolen from the Syndicate's warehouse flickered with faint blue light. The files were heavily encrypted, but their headers hinted at something called Operation Chimera. Whatever it was, Elias knew it wasn't just an assassination campaign. It was systemic, calculated, and designed to destabilize humanity on a galactic scale. "Dad, you can't do this alone." Amelia's voice broke through his thoughts. She stood by the door, her expression a mixture of anger and concern. Elias didn't look up. "I've handled worse." "Worse than a galaxy-wide conspiracy with an assassin on your trail?" she shot back. "You're not invincible." He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "I don't have a choice, Amelia. If I don't stop them, they'll come after you, after everyone. This isn't just about Ethan anymore." She stepped closer, her tone softening. "Then let me help." "You don't have to do this alone." Elias shook his head. "No. I've already lost one family member. I won't risk losing another." Amelia crossed her arms, frustration evident, but she didn't argue further. Instead, she placed a portable decryption unit on the table. "At least let me make it easier. This will crack those files faster than anything you have." Elias offered her a faint smile. "Thanks." The decryption process was slow, each percentage tick dragging like hours. While he waited, Elias reviewed everything he knew about the Syndicate and Lorik Ven. The assassin wasn't just a hired gun, he was a symbol of fear, used to keep the Syndicate's enemies in check. If Elias could take him down, it would be more than personal vengeance. It would send a message to those who thought humanity was an easy target. The device beeped, signaling that the decryption was complete. The screen filled with lines of text and diagrams, but one file stood out, a detailed schematic of Kael'thar Station's reactor core. "What the hell are they planning?" Elias muttered, his eyes scanning the document. The plan was horrifyingly clear. The Syndicate intended to sabotage the station's reactor, triggering an explosion that would wipe out thousands of lives and cripple humanity's presence in the sector. The operation was set to be executed in less than 12 hours. Amelia leaned over his shoulder, her face pale as she read the details. "They're going to blame this on humanity, aren't they? Make it look like a terrorist attack." Elias nodded grimly. "It'll give the anti-human factions in the Council all the justification they need to push us out of galactic politics. We have to stop them," she said. "We will," Elias replied. The reactor was housed in the heart of Kael'thar Station, a sprawling complex of interconnected chambers and heavily secured access points. Getting inside unnoticed was nearly impossible, but Elias had no intention of being subtle. He and Amelia moved through the station's industrial levels, blending in with the workers and maintenance crews. Each step brought them closer to the reactor and the heart of the Syndicate's plan. "Security's going to be tight," Amelia whispered as they approached the final checkpoint. Elias smirked. "Then we'll just have to be tighter." He activated a signal jammer, disrupting the guards' communications, and moved in with practiced precision. The first 2 guards went down silently, their unconscious bodies hidden behind crates. A third tried to raise the alarm but was silenced by a well-placed shot from Elias's pistol. "Clear," he said, motioning for Amelia to follow. The reactor control room was a hive of activity, Syndicate operatives moving between terminals and coordinating the final stages of their operation. At the center of the room stood Lorik Ven, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos around him. Elias crouched behind a console, his weapon trained on the assassin. "There he is," he murmured. Amelia placed a small device on the floor, its blinking light indicating it was ready to disrupt the Syndicate's systems. This will fry their networks, but it'll only buy us a few minutes. Long enough, Elias said, his eyes locked on Lorik. With a nod, Amelia activated the device. The room plunged into chaos as alarms blared and screens flickered. Elias seized the moment, emerging from cover and firing a volley of precise shots that took down 2 operatives before they could react. Trent! Lorik's voice cut through the noise, his tone more amused than angry. I was hoping you'd show up. Elias didn't respond, advancing with measured determination. Lorik moved like a blur, his exoskeleton reflecting the harsh lights as he dodged Elias's shots and closed the distance between them. The fight was brutal, a clash of raw strength and lethal skill. Lorik's strikes were quick and precise, but Elias's experience and resilience kept him in the fight. The sound of fists meeting armor and the crack of energy weapons filled the room as the 2 warriors battled for dominance. You're persistent, Lorik said, his voice tight with effort. But this ends here. Elias blocked a blow aimed at his head and countered with a strike to Lorik's torso, sending the assassin staggering back. Not for me, it doesn't. Before Lorik could recover, Elias tackled him, pinning him to the ground. He aimed his pistol at the assassin's head, his finger hovering over the trigger. Who hired you? Elias demanded. Lorik's mandibles clicked in a mocking smile. You think killing me will stop this? You're fighting a Hydra, General. Cut off 1 head, and 2 more will take its place. Elias's gaze hardened. I'm not leaving without answers. Lorik chuckled, even as blood seeped from a wound on his side. You'll find nothing but more bodies. The Syndicate's reach is infinite. Elias didn't have time to argue. The sound of reinforcements echoed down the corridors, and he knew their window was closing. Dad, we have to go! Amelia shouted from the control panel, where she was working to disable the reactor's sabotage protocols. Elias delivered a final blow, rendering Lorik unconscious. He and Amelia moved quickly, setting the reactor's systems back to normal and planting evidence of the Syndicate's involvement for the authorities to find. As they fled the control room, the station's security forces arrived, drawn by the chaos. Elias and Amelia blended into the panicked crowd, slipping away unnoticed. Later, aboard a safe-house ship in orbit, Amelia turned to her father. What now? Elias stared out the viewport at the endless expanse of stars. We've bought humanity time, but this isn't over. The Syndicate won't stop, and neither will I. Amelia nodded, her resolve matching his. Then let's make sure they regret underestimating us. Elias allowed himself a rare smile. Together, they were stronger, and the fight was far from finished.